I'd like to start talking about type inside of Illustrator. You'll notice I have a blank document open. What we want to do is focus on some of the different type tools inside of the program. If you come over to the Tools panel, you'll notice that there's quite a few. Of course, we have the Type tool, but if you click and hold down, you'll reveal the hidden tools. What we want to focus on in this movie is how we can work with the Type tool and the Area Type tool. We'll talk about some of these other tools a little bit later on. Each of these tools gives you the ability to create different types of text. Specifically, what we want to talk about in this movie is something called point text and something else called area text. Point text is probably the most common, and it works much like you would expect it to. To create point text, all you have to do is have the type tool selected and click somewhere within the document, and you'll get a blinking cursor. With the blinking cursor, you can add some text. Here is some text inside of Illustrator. And you can continue to add as much text as necessary. So to save some time, if I copy this, I can paste it, and I could continue to do that. If you decide that you need a second line, you could press Return or Enter and continue to type. So that's point text. Now, if you want to interact with the point text, you need to select it. If you have a blinking cursor, it's a good idea not to press V on the keyboard to activate the selection tool, because really what you'll be doing is typing in the letter V. Instead, you can come over and choose the selection tool. Now, when you select text inside of Illustrator, you get this bounding box. This bounding box can be very useful in certain situations. In others, it can be somewhat distracting. So you have a couple different options in terms of turning off the visibility of this bounding box. The first really isn't my preferred method, but it does work. You can come up to the View menu, and under the View menu, you can choose Hide Bounding Box, and you'll notice now the bounding box is gone. We still have a selection, and it's obvious because the anchor point is selected, but you don't see the bounding box. Now, the problem I have with this is sometimes I like the bounding box, so there's a better way to temporarily turn off that bounding box. Before we look at that, let's turn it back on by coming up to the View menu and choosing Show Bounding Box. Once you do that, if you highlight the Direct Selection tool, A is the keyboard shortcut, you'll notice now you just see the anchor point. This anchor point is important, especially when it comes to alignment. If we take a look at the alignment options within the control panel, you'll notice right now it's set to align left, which means the anchor point is to the left of the text. If you choose something like Align Right, then the anchor point will be aligned to the right of the text. But what's important to understand is that the anchor point is anchored, so it's actually the text that moves. So the text will move really to the left of the anchor point, which is somewhat confusing because that's considered Align Right, but really the anchor point at that point is to the right of the text. So watch the text here within the document as I click this button. The text moves and that anchor point stays put. The same is true if you choose Align Center. So that is point text, and it's a fairly common way to work with text inside of Illustrator. Now, the other common way to work with text inside of Illustrator is to use something called area text. Now, certainly you can come over and choose that specific tool, the area type tool, to create area text, but it's not necessary. If you have the type tool selected, you can create area text by clicking and dragging a box. This box is establishing the area for the text to live within. So once you let go of the mouse, you can add text. I'm just going to go ahead and paste that same sentence. And you can continue to add the text, and you'll notice if you exceed the width of the box, it just wraps down to the next line. If you want to add another line, you can press Return or Enter or New Paragraph, and you'll get that functionality. So this is area text. Now, there are a couple of things that you should be aware of when it comes to area text. For example, if you continue to add text beyond the dimensions of the area text field, you get this overset marker. This overset marker is an indicator that you have more text than what the text area can display. And you have a couple different options. You can come over and choose the selection tool and click on that overset mark. When you click on that overset mark, you'll notice you get a loaded text icon, which means if you were to click, you'll create a new text area, and it's threaded to the previous text area. Now, this opens up a can of worms for a completely different discussion that we'll have at a later time within this chapter. To get rid of it, you can go ahead and double-click on this same icon. When you do that, you'll notice it goes away. If you have the selection tool highlighted and you see the bounding box, you can increase the height or the width of the text area, which will get rid of that overset mark in this case. Because I did that, I also want to point out that you can't do that with point text. With point text, if you resize it using one of these handles, you're actually scaling the text, not the area, because it's not area text, it's point text. So I'll go ahead and undo that. The other thing that I want to show you is if you select this text area, with it selected, you can come up to the Type menu. And under the Type menu, you can choose Area Type Options. And we have a lot of different options here. Here, you can specify the width and the height of the text area. You can also break it up into multiple rows and columns. If you come down here and choose Preview, if I increase the number of rows, you can see we have 2 rows of type. You can also increase the number of columns. And if you're working with rows and columns, you can also adjust the span, which is essentially the width of the row or the column. And you can also control the gutter, which is the distance between the rows and the columns. I'm going to go ahead and set these back to 1 for now. The other thing that I'd like to point out is you can establish an offset. The offset gives you the ability to add some padding or interior cushion around the text area. What's nice about this is if you want to stroke the type area, you would have that ability. Again, I'm going to go ahead and set this back to 0. And of course, you also have text flow options if you are going to thread your text. And again, we'll talk about that in greater detail a little bit later on. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this dialog box. One other thing that I want to show you is that a text area or a type area doesn't have to be a rectangle. It really can be any shape. If you come over and choose the ellipse tool, with the ellipse tool, I'm going to come over here and swap the fill and stroke so we have a black stroke and no fill. If I click and drag out a circle, at that point you can come over and choose the area type tool. You'll notice that the icon looks a little bit different. We have a dotted circle around the I-beam. If you click inside the circle and start adding text, you'll notice that the text is essentially being forced to stay within the confines of that shape. So those are the 2 major ways that you're going to create type inside of Illustrator. You're going to work with point text and area text, but certainly there's other ways to work with type inside of the program, and we'll take a look at those options over the next couple movies.